protected area managers. We've tended to hang on to them. We need to enable data sharing so we can answer these big questions. We heard a lot about the key threats. That there was great sessions on wildlife crime, on human-wildlife conflict, and on invasive species that were really core to this stream. All of these remain problems. We know that we have a crisis for some species, especially in wildlife crime now, and there's a call for further attention to that. Probably a larger threat, an actual threat to ecological integrity of our systems is invasive species. This is a global challenge, and there is a new book on managing invasive species, which was launched at this Congress, and you can still download free. It's a Springer book from the website, and that's a key outcome of this Congress. In terms of human-wildlife conflict, the people who put this together said we needed to call this something else. We needed to call it human-wildlife interactions to give it more of a sense of hope and understand that there were positive as well as negative. You know, it's not always a happy experience for many people in the world to live next to a protected area. Your crops get eaten, etc., and we have to pay a lot more attention to this challenge. In terms of solutions, there were many key solutions brought out. I just mentioned the invasive species book. We launched a new key biodiversity area standard. We had a discussion of this emerging red list of ecosystems standard and a discussion of how well we can use the red list of threatened species. We had a big initiative launched here on green list. And hopefully this will drive countries to want to meet a standard. We've never had a standard before. We've always had objectives, but never a standard. And I think this is an enormous contribution from this Congress, and hopefully we'll all get behind this, push this in our countries, and ramp up the quality of protected areas by the use of this standard. I mentioned data a little earlier. We need to build on initiatives like Protected Planet, and there's many others out there, so that we can share data and ask these questions. And I guess the other solution is we need to get governments behind large-scale connectivity and active ecological restoration, because the two go hand in hand in many cases. This thinking and this initiative has largely been led by NGOs, and we have to mainstream this if we're going to be successful. We finished the session with the Beyond ACHI targets, and we know that Target 11, meeting Target 11 by itself, will not halt biodiversity loss. This is an insufficient target. The challenge for us, I think, as a community, is to still push the world to completion of Target 11 in all its glory, not just the numeric targets. So we need to push towards the completion of Target 11 and at the same time start to think beyond it. But we don't want to take the eye off the ball of 2020 in completing that. That's fundamental. But we also know, and there's been lots of evidence presented here, that we have to move far beyond this. That we need far bigger targets if we're going to live sustainably with nature on this planet, and I'll get to that in a bit in the recommendations. There was a lovely piece that came in we thought we should share with you in terms of the context for a new vision. As we develop a new vision, these three words kind of boom out. It's going to require cooperation of all peoples of the planet, their governments and industry. We all live on one planet. It's one living system. It's going to require courage to admit where we failed, to carry through on past promises, and to take hard decisions, and it's going to take commitment to a step change. And this Congress is all about a step change. I hope we're all going away thinking that this is a step change in conservation. So what are the recommendations that came from you guys, right? These don't come from the four of us. They come from the streams. We have crafted them, but we've crafted them with a set of rapporteurs that went to all of the sessions all input from all of the session leads, right? They will be rough because we haven't had time to really polish these, but these are the kinds of things that go forward. So there's a lot of text here, and you're going to have to bear with me because I have to read it. But countries include the ACHI targets. There's even the first typo. But we want a full implementation of Target 11. We don't want to take our eye off that ball. That's first and foremost, and we want it included in national biodiversity strategies and action plans to implement these. It's not a matter of starting again with a new target or ignoring the promises already made. So feet to the fire on Target 11. We need to, for the IUCN to get involved in informal definitions of protected area downgrading, degazettement, and downsizing. And we want the multilateral lending institutions and the private sector actors to develop both policies and safeguards governing their engagement against this. We have to hang on to what we have. Governments and partners have to give due attention to the issue of governance, including corruption as key impediments to successful conservation and the management of protected areas. Governments and other sectors have to prioritize not only the establishment of new things, we have to work on new things, but we also have to work on quality. And they can't be a saw-off. We can't saw off one against the other, we have to do both. So we have to focus both on the new protected areas networks and the management. And often in countries, it becomes a trade-off. We have to get governments and other sectors to prioritize on the establishment I'm sorry, I lost my spot there. Progress towards the ACHI target should be based on comprehensive assessment of how well these protected areas are conserving to biodiversity, rather than just an assessment of area covered. So we have to move to really hard measures of biodiversity outcomes here. It's possible. We had great monitoring sessions that talked about that. There's lots of new tools, and as a community, we have to get on with this job. There was a call to move to new governance types, and I'm sure we're going to hear more about this from our colleagues in the governance stream, but we particularly noted the need to move to be inclusive on ICCAs, and there were great sessions on privately protected areas and a new standard for what is going to be included or what we should include in privately protected areas. So we have to move beyond governments in doing this job. Countries have to support ongoing risk assessments for species and ecosystems, especially by undertaking or repeating assessments following IUCN standards. We have to focus on areas that contribute significantly to the global persistence of biodiversity in terrestrial areas, in freshwater areas, and marine areas as we expand this system. We have to target the expansion to where it's going to halt biodiversity loss. This is a key finding. Governments have to establish incentives and support connectivity projects across both fragmented and unfragmented landscapes. We can't just connect up the areas where it's easy to do. We have to think about ecological restoration to go across fragmented landscapes now and build these conservation networks. We get to there's 18 of these, so just 2 more slides. We want everybody here. We want countries to support the Green List standard and use it as a mechanism to drive towards far better quality and get beyond to this 24% are only effectively managed. The contribution of Indigenous and local people in conservation has to be recognized and promoted, along with the importance of effective and appropriate legal frameworks that acknowledge this and private protected areas. We need to have some focus on what other effective area-based conservation means. On one hand, it's a great opportunity to bring in ICCAs. On the other hand, we're seeing cheating in countries where they're trying to rebrand existing areas as ICCAs, and we need to develop an IUCN guideline on what really can count here, and we've already been asked to do it by COP 11 of the CBD. Two financing ones. Small grant mechanisms for conservation of biodiversity are highly effective. That was the conclusion coming out of that stream, and should be strongly supported to help civil society, where much of this activity is coming from, in designing and governing and managing protected area systems. And this complements large-scale funding. So thumbs up to the small grant mechanisms. Countries, donors, and international funding agencies commit to increasing financial resources. This, Get Redford had a great rant last night about how we really were not taking seriously the funding. We have funding. We have funding in the order of billions of dollars. But if you compare it to other funding in the world, to military, to ice cream, to pet food in America, we're not even on the radar in terms of funding, and it's time we demanded out of society, because there appears to be societal support for these places, an adequate level of funding to use protected areas to save nature. So just to conclude, so we want urgent actions taken by government and local at the global and local communities to address the rising threats from wildlife crime, invasive species, climate change, disease, habitat degradation and loss, and we know we need massive capacity building and funding support to do this. I already mentioned the one on human and wildlife conflict, but John, we put it in as a recommendation. There was a call for a communication channel for the IUCN to get involved more in emergencies when there are particular crises around the planet. This is not a new idea, it's been around for a while, and we recommend that this be explored further so that the weight of the IUCN can help organizations in countries to deal with some of these crises. Countries got to have a much greater consistency in the collection, evaluation, reporting, and biodiversity data. I talked about that. We need a step change here in moving forward, and there's some good work going on in this area. And then just finally to conclude, and we just added this one in on the ACHI targets. I think many of you were in the room for the discussion on Beyond ACHI. We did conclude the target 11 was insufficient. There was, this is what we think we agreed to, that people and governments must move far beyond the ACHI targets to adaptive conservation systems that are based on halting biodiversity loss. This must be based on conservation planning that brings in both human and nature's needs. We're not going to do this unless we sit down at the table with the food production folks and look at allocations. We need to do it as one planning system. The total area in conservation needs to be far higher than the current conceptions that we have. In the seas, there seems to be clear support, and this isn't the total number for conservation, but clear support that 30% of the regional seas should be in no-take. And that's good for the economy, it's also good for nature conservation. And we note that there was citizen support, and this is from the ZSL survey, for the conservation of nature at a percentage target of 50%. So that's our conclusions. We're going to now open it up for discussion and input.